Now that we went to 7 minutes, for those of you that don't know or are visiting, we have a gentleman that usually sits over in this corner, Kenny. He's always asking for 10, 15, 20 minutes on the break just to make life interesting. Anyway, some of you may know and some of you may not know or remember that Journey Schatz had come and spoke when we were over in our other location over in the Bethel Baptist building, and he was going to YWAM, and we ended up supporting him during that time. He's come back, and I asked him to come and give us a report for what God did in his life and what he was doing there. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Journey Schatz, and he's going to go ahead and share what God's done in his life. Okay, welcome.
Thanks. I'm going to set that in there. Okay, so I was in film, so I'm a very media person, so most of my stuff will be very media heavy, so we can keep Todd busy. But you can just start with the slideshow whenever. And so I'm just going to be going really fast over quite a few things. I'll be around afterwards if you have questions or anything. There's just a lot I wanted to talk about and not that much time. So that's just my name, Journey Schatz. Like he said, as part of YWAM, which is Youth with a Mission, and I was in Perth, and then YWAM has different ministries that are part of it, and I was in a ministry called Signet Films, which uses film in missions. You can go to the next slide, Todd. Just going to give a recap kind of what happened. So I committed to serve with YWAM for 2 years. That was my initial plan, was to go for 2 years. And so around 2 years ago, I spoke at Living Waters. I know some of you were here, and as Fred said, you might remember me. As Fred also mentioned, Living Waters supported me. So it started out that Hasten Folk, who I think some of you guys know, started out supporting me, and then he was no longer able to, so Living Water decided to take over and keep supporting me. So just want to say thank you for that, and just remind you all that everything I'm talking about, and you guys were part of, it wasn't possible without support. So just thank you guys for being supporters, and just, want to encourage you that everything I'm going to talk about was made possible by you guys, so thanks for that. So I went to Australia, into missions for about a year and a half, so not quite the 2 years I committed to. During that time, I pretty much decided that I would like to be in missions much longer. I was expecting to be there 10, 15, 20 years, but God brought up something in my life. When I was seeking him one day, he just brought up an issue, and then speaking with YWAM leadership, they thought it would be better for me to step out of missions and come home to grow through some things. Just because the way they put it is missions are the front line spiritually, so it's easier to develop yourself when you're out of missions and not in that really spiritually intense environment. So they just encouraged me to come home, and then so I actually got back to the U.S. in around April. And I wasn't planning on being back for this, but it just happened to perfectly align with some of my family members going on an extended vacation, and one of my brothers and some of my sisters were willing to help pay for me to go with them. So I was able to, I didn't see my family for the whole time I was in Australia, and then it was a blessing that as soon as I got back, I was able to spend several months out with them. Now I'm back in Billings. So God spoke to come home and work on some stuff. So I have several mentors, one of whom is Pastor Fred, who I'll be meeting with and just working on growing closer to God. And then hopefully I'll return to missions at some point in a few years. We can go to the next slide. So I was going to talk about what Youth with a Mission, or YWAM, is. YWAM is just YWAM, shortened for Youth with a Mission. The biggest thing about them is that's their symbol, their logo. And then I guess it's their slogan, their vision statement, a lot of things all in one, is to know God and make him known. That's why YWAM exists, is to help people know God and then to make God known to other people. And so it was started, I don't think it was started in the U.S., I think it was started in the Bahamas, but it was started by an American in 1960. His name was Loren Cunningham, and basically he was praying one day and had a vision of, while he was praying, he just saw basically a world map, and then he saw the waters on the map start moving and giant waves hitting different nations. and then the water turned into young people. So YWAM says they started by seeing waves of young people, and those young people were missionaries. And so at that time, there was very few young people going into missions. It was mostly older people who had seminary and more life experiences and whole families, which is great to have in missions as well. But there was lots of young people who wanted to go into the mission field, but no one would send them. So YWAM Youth with a Mission started to send youth. That's why the name is Youth with a Mission. There is lots of older people in YWAM. They help mentor the younger people, show them how to do missions, and just also do missions. So it's not just young people, but that was how they started, and that's how their name came about. So yeah, they started in the U.S., but now they have what they call YWAM bases all over the world. So there is like a YWAM base in Montana. There's one that's in Lakeside, which is by Flathead Lake. There's a base near Cody, Wyoming. There's ones in Idaho. Pretty much every state has at least one base. Some will have multiple. And most countries will have, virtually every country in the world has at least one YWAM base. So a base is basically where they'll have like offices. They'll run schools, so they'll have schools in different places, different housing. So it's all YWAM, but there's different locations have different focuses, and that'll come from each base, basically. But then one thing that connects all of YWAM is they have three main things they focus on, which is teaching, evangelism, and mercy ministries. So teaching is pretty simple. It's just teaching people how to do missions, but also teaching other people about God. And they even do things like they teach healthcare in poor countries, and they teach English, and there's lots of teaching. Evangelism is basically just telling people about God. So they'll do a lot of like street evangelism, where you just go to another country, or in the U.S. as well, and just walk down the streets, and anyone you can talk to, you just talk to them and share about who God is with them. And then mercy ministries, I don't know if it's an actual definition, but YWAM considers that just giving people things, basically. So I know the Perth base that I was part of did a lot of healthcare ministry. So they'd like go to poor countries like Nepal and just hand out like basic medicine, soap, like instructional booklets about basic healthcare and sanitation. And they'd consider that stuff mercy ministries because they're just giving things for free. But yeah, we can go to the next slide. So I was going to show where I was. I was part of YWAM Perth, which is obviously in Perth, Australia. As you can see, Perth is on the west coast, and all the cities in Australia are labeled. So most of them are all on the east coast and in the south. So Perth is very isolated, and it's the only city in all of Western Australia, so that whole state. So Perth is big. It's 2 or 3 million people. But then as soon as you leave Perth, there's like nothing. So it's kind of an interesting environment because you're in a big city, but you're very isolated. We can go to the next slide. Okay, and so, yeah, as I said, I was part of a film ministry. So the first thing I did was do a film school. And there's a lot I could say about that, but for the sake of time, the biggest thing I took away from the film school is why we use film. And so, like, why was I doing a film ministry? And so, why film? I mean, the first and biggest reason is because of the power of story, which I'll talk about in a minute. But then also, lots of people spend a lot of their lives watching films or TV or other media. So it's just something where people already spend a lot of time. So if we can share about God in something they're already doing, that's a plus. And then, yeah, again, it relates back to story. It's one of the most common storytelling methods. So basically why I do film stuff is because I believe story is really powerful. So why is story such a powerful thing? The first point is, yeah, Jesus used story. He has lots of, like in the Gospels, Jesus does do a lot of preaching and teaching, but he also shares a lot of like parables, which are stories. And so why would he do that? I think, as I put up there, there's an emotional connection in story. So if I just teach a class, you forget a lot of the details of the facts. But if I can share something through a story, you can connect emotionally to the characters in the story, and that helps you remember and really understand what is being taught. And then I think God created us for story. So like we were built for story. And you can see that in a lot of ways. Like a lot of things people do, even though they don't realize it, is always story. You meet with your friends, and you tell stories. When we relax, we read books, which are stories. Or we watch movies, which are stories. Even when we sleep, we dream in story. And I think God has created us to connect with story, and that's why it's such a big part of our lives, even though we don't realize it at times. And then also, a story is better than just like a class because it's not intellectual or not intimidating. So if I go to like another country, they might not want to come to like a week-long class or sermon series about who God is. But if I just go there, oh, hey, we're going to show a film that was made here, it's a lot less intimidating. And then the last point is kind of, there's a lot else I could say about story, but essentially, it shows the journey to the answer, not just the answer. And so, even in like the parable, which one was I thinking of? The prodigal son, basically, God could just give a sermon about how God is loving, but he gives us this story that shows a son like rejecting his father and giving his father reasons to hate him, but in the end, the father still loves the son. And it just shows that like it gives a deeper answer and more of a connection to what you're trying to teach through story. So that is the biggest thing from the film school. We can go to the next slide. I don't remember what I had. Next slide, yeah, you're good. Okay. Yep, technology is sometimes slow. I think what I go on to next right away is, I was thinking about it. Basically, instead of just talking about big concepts of what I was doing, I figured just sharing one specific film project we worked on is a good way to show what we were doing the whole time. And so when the slides eventually get there, we were, as part of the film school actually, after we had 3 months of lectures, we were going to do an actual project and make a film. And that came about by, there was someone named Alex, who's a long-term missionary in Indonesia. Indonesia is, if you don't know anything about the country, basically a whole bunch of different islands. And so Alex is from Indonesia, but he's from a different island than where he's working as a missionary. Okay, this is the team that went. I'll start there. So this is the team that went to Indonesia to make the film I'm about to talk about. So we have the film school. The guy in the end leads the film school. Then there's me, a bunch of students. And then the other guy with his face blurred, he staffs the film school. But he's from a closed nation. Where he's from, it's illegal to be a Christian. So we blurred his face because if his government ever sees him part of a Christian organization, they can make him come back to the country. So just for security reasons, we always blur his face, and that's his child's face. We also blurred. And so people on either end are like the staff for the school, and the S4 in the middle were students on the film school. And so all of us went to Indonesia. You can go to the next slide. Yeah. So as you can see, there's Australia. Indonesia is just right above Australia, so it's actually quite close. From Perth to Indonesia is, I think, like a 4 or 5 hour flight, so it's not too bad. And then as you can see, all those islands are Indonesia. So it's a bunch of different islands. Also, I didn't realize this until I went there, but Indonesia has the highest population of Muslims in the world, even more than like the Middle East. So it's something like 98% of all Indonesians are Muslim. So we can go to the next slide. So this is closer in Indonesia. As you can see, there's Singapore up there, and Malaysia is right above it. I don't know if I'm going to get in the way of that, but we went to an island called Lombok, which is this one right here. When we went there was no airport on Lombok. There is now, but we had to fly to Bali and then take a boat to Lombok, and that's the island we were on. And then the next slide should be zoomed in on Lombok. Yeah. So as you can see, this was the island Bali. We took the boat from there to Lombok, and that's the island we were on. And this is the island that Alex is a long-term missionary at. And so he came from an island that's farther to the east, that's more Christian, and he came to Lombok to be a missionary. One of the reasons he came to Lombok is because they're one of the most Muslim islands in Indonesia, and they're also very remote. So like I said, there's no airport when we went there. So anything on the island has to be brought by ships, and very few people go there just because it's hard to get to Lombok because there's no airports. But so when Alex first moved here, he moved to this town, Simbaloon, which is where our team went. But he was serving as a missionary in Simbaloon for a few years, and then they found out he was a Christian, and because they were Muslim, they didn't like that. So during the middle of night, one night, they burned his house down, and so he just grabbed like him and his family, and they just like ran away. And they ended up going all the way down to Mataram, which is a pretty small island. So from like here, taking this road to Simbaloon, it's about 4 hours in a car. You're driving pretty slow. If you're on like a motorcycle, you can go between traffic and do it in like 2 hours. So it's a pretty small island. But so he was in Cymbalune. They burned his house down and told him not to come back. And then he went to Mataram. Mataram is like the biggest city on the island. And so there's a lot more like government officials and police. And so it's still Muslims. They're not real like, they don't really like Christians, but the government in Mataram will like enforce that they can't, beat up Christians on the street or burn their house down or anything. So he moved to Mataram where he's quite safe there. But he still wanted to do ministry in Cymbalune. So he asked the film school leader, the guy leading the film school, if he would come to Lombok and make a film in Cymbalune. And then Alex would use that film as a reason to go back. He would say that he had friends like from Australia who made a film and that he's going back to show the film, not going back to preach. In reality, he's going back as a missionary. But it was just, he wanted to use the film, so the film itself as a tool to show who God is, but also the film as an excuse for him to go back to Cymbalune. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, and so our team went to Lombok, and before we started filming, anywhere we go, we are missionaries first and filmmakers second. So we were just doing any opportunities we had to like help do missions work. And so one opportunity we had was to teach at kindergarten. So this person's name is Holly. She was the main teacher. She worked with kids a lot. So the first few weeks we would just do normal missionary things. So we'd go to this kindergarten and help teach, and then we could also like build relationships with the kids and share about who God is with the kids. So that was all of us at a kindergarten. There's the next slide. And then they also wanted us to teach English. And so there was a hospital that said we could use the hospital to teach English. And so the first day we were just literally in a hallway. And so as you can see, I'm there helping teach English. The girls mostly taught at the kindergarten, and me and the other guy, who's named Matt, taught the English part. You can go to the next slide. They eventually gave us a classroom. We were in a hospital, so like other people could come, but it was mostly the doctors and the nurses who worked there who came. So you can see we have all the like body parts labeled because they know some English, but they didn't really know the English words for a lot of the body parts. So they're like, if someone who only speaks English comes to our hospital, we don't know what he's saying. So can you teach us all these parts? So that's what we were doing. The next slide. This is just some of the students. There's a lot of girls, but there's some guys in there and in the back. Being here on the next slide. And so we were just doing normal. We were teaching, building relationships, connecting with people, like evangelism, sharing about who God is for the first few weeks. And then we started actually going to make the film. So in this picture, we were looking for different locations where we could film. That's obviously me. There's Matt, who does our camera work, and he has his camera. And this is Alex. He's the guy who invited us there, and who's there long term. And he was showing us different like jungle areas we could film in. And so the next slide. This is Holly, who directed the film. That was our main actor, and she was, I think, going over the script with our main actor. One thing I'll point out with him, he's actually going to a Christian school in Singapore now. So I don't think he was a Christian when we came, but we were able to work with him for several weeks and like share with him. And then he stayed in touch with Alex for a long time, and now he's actually a Christian and going to a Christian school in a different country. So there's at least one person who was impacted by the film. There's the next slide. This is just more behind the scenes of filming. I just done a bunch of pictures. The next slide, I think, is the poster. Yeah. And so Alex asked us to make a film. He wanted something just short, so it's 13 minutes long, and we'll watch it in a minute here. But the film is called Putra. Putra is an Indonesian word that means sun. That is just the name we ended up settling on. And so Alex wanted us to make something that would share like a biblical concept, but not be obviously Christian, because if it's obviously Christians, the Muslims wouldn't watch it, and he'd get in trouble again. So we decided we'd take a parable and like change it a little bit so that you still get the idea behind the parable, but that it's not obviously that. So we did do the prodigal son, and we like contextualized it to Indonesia and changed it enough that you couldn't tell it was obviously Christian. And this is the film we made. That's the poster for it. I think we can just watch the film now, and I can talk about it a bit more. It's in Bahasa, which is one of the languages I speak in Indonesian. So there's English subtitles. It might be kind of hard to get everything they say because it goes kind of fast, but we'll just show that film quickly. I'll go back here.
Hei, kamu, tukang melamun, bangun.
Maaf, saya
Ya, kamu.
bekerja.
Saya hampir menyelesaikan pekerjaan yang di sini. Saya sudah menyelesaikan tugas saya dari tadi. Sedangkan kamu terlalu lamban. Di lain waktu saya tidak akan membantu kamu lagi.
Ya sebenarnya saya nggak butuh bantuan kamu.
Kita butuh bekerja banyak di sawah ini. Kita melakukan semua pekerjaan ini untuk membantu. Pelamun seperti kamu tidak dapat menyelesaikan apapun.
Berdebat tidak akan menyelesaikan apapun. Ayah kalian sedang memperbaiki motornya. Sepertinya dia akan senang jika kalian membantunya.
Kamu ternyata pandai untuk masalah ini, Bakti. Kamu bisa mendapatkan motor ini jika suatu saat nanti kita memiliki. Seolah-olah kita mampu. Kita tahu bahwa kita tidak mampu untuk itu. Hei, ayah sudah pergi cukup lama. Kemana dia pergi?
Ayah, mobil siapa ini?
Mobil kita, hadiah untuk keluarga kita. Coba tebak siapa yang akan mendapat motor ini.
Tunggu, apa itu tidak adil?
Bahkan kamu tidak peduli tentang motor ini.
Ini bukan masalah motornya, tapi kalian memberikan kebebasan kepada Bakti kemana saja dia mau. Sedangkan saya selalu bekerja di sawah. Jelas itu terlihat Bakti anak kesayangan. Saya yakin saya tidak akan dapat menyetir mobil ini.
Ini mobil untuk keluarga kita.
Iya, tapi saya terasa bukan dari keluarga ini.
Tunggu!
Berlibur ke Australia, suatu pengalaman yang berharga yang pernah saya lakukan. Saya bisa berenang dengan hiu, saya juga boxing dengan kanguru, bermain kano di sungai. Hai Putra,
Ya,
jika kamu ada waktu kita bisa pergi bersama.
ya, kalau saja. Kamu tahu, saya tidak mampu untuk itu.
Mungkin jika ada kamu bekerja lebih lama, mungkin mengingatkan saya tentang cerita gila.
Apa? Apa yang kamu katakan? Harta karun?
Ya, paman saya adalah orang arkeologi dan dia memberitahu saya bahwa dia percaya tentang adanya harta karun kuno tersembunyi di balik bukit itu. Bisa dibilang itu seharga ratusan miliar.
Itu akan sangat gampang. Saya tahu banyak tentang bukit itu. Jika saya memulai itu dari sekarang, saya dapat mendahului mereka. Dan masalah saya akan terpecahkan jika saya menemukannya. Ya, saya harus pergi.
Putra pergi membawa mobil dan semuanya.
Tinggal ke sini saya belum pergi. Saya akan terus berjalan ke sini.
Putra, apa yang kamu lakukan?
Apakah kamu menemukannya?
Tidak. Saya menemukan mobil itu dalam keadaan rusak. Saya tahu bahwa ini bakalan terjadi. Kalau begitu di mana Putra? Saya menemukan mobil itu dalam keadaan kosong. Saya tahu mungkin si bodoh itu masih hidup.
Tolong pulang dengan selamat.
Aku menyerah sekarang. Sudah, lupakan itu. Saya sudah terlalu banyak membuat masalah. Tapi bagaimana bisa aku pulang? Aku sudah terlalu banyak buat masalah untuk keluargaku. Aku yakin mereka pasti tidak memandangku dengan baik.
Tukang melamun, kamu masih hidup di dalam imajinasimu. Kasihan sekali, ternyata kehidupan nyata tidak seindah apa yang kamu pikirkan.
Bagaimana kamu bisa melakukan ini kepada kami?
Kamu telah membuat kita lebih miskin dari sebelumnya.
Kamu telah menghancurkan pemberian hadiah dari ayah untuk keluarga kita.
Kamu tidak pantas untuk menjadi anak saya.
Apa yang kamu lakukan di sini?
Saya mendengar tentang harta karun tersembunyi di bukit ini. Saya telah mencoba mencarinya untuk beberapa hari ini, tapi saya tidak menemukannya. Mungkin kamu bisa membantu saya menemukannya? Emangnya kenapa?
Kamu masih percaya tentang semua itu? Itu omong kosong. Semua itu omong kosong. Teman-teman saya memperbesar-besarkan cerita itu. Kawan mereka tidak menemukan apapun, dan lagi pula, kalaupun itu semuanya ada, pasti semua sia-sia.
Berarti saya sudah melakukan hal yang sia-sia.
Ya, kamu telah memberikan semuanya. Cunda.
Sepertinya saya harus pulang ke perkampungan.
Mungkin saja kamu tidak mampu untuk menunjukkan wajahmu di hadapan mereka setelah apa yang kamu perbuat.
Ya, mungkin cuma itu yang bisa saya lakukan.
Ya, semua itu harus ada bayarannya.
Mungkin ini cukup.
Oke.
apa yang ayah lakukan? Hentikan ini.
Anakku, kamu masih hidup. Kamu pulang.
Ya, tapi saya sudah merusak mobil, handphone saya hilang, dan juga duit saya hilang.
Ya, saya tahu.
Tapi saya bisa bekerja lebih keras di sawah, dan saya juga bisa tidur di luar rumah. Saya juga bisa menggantikan pekerjaan kakak saya. Tapi tolong maafkan saya, ayah. Saya bisa melakukan semuanya.
Tidak.
Tidak, ayah. Ayah tidak mengerti. Saya terlalu buruk dan egois.
Tidak. Kamu tidak mengerti. Bahwa mobil ini sangat mahal. Tetapi kamu adalah anakku. Dan yang terpenting kamu bersama saya.
Tidak, ayah. Saya tidak pantas mendapatkan ini. Maafkan saya, ayah. Ini, ayah.
Lihatlah ini. Ayah akan memberikan hadiah yang spesial.
Saya tidak pantas untuk jadi anak ayah.
Saya bahagia menjadi ayahmu, putra.
He's turning my mic back on. There we go. So yeah, we just, I don't know if all of that made sense. It makes more sense if you're Indonesian, and if you speak the language, it's easier to follow. But we would make lots of films like that, where they're just these short little projects. But they, like, I think they can have quite an impact. We were able to, so we filmed it, and then we went back to Australia to edit it and everything. And then just me and one other person went back, so a smaller team went back, and we gave it to Alex. We also went all around the island and helped him set up like these big blow-up screens and stuff, and screened it in different small villages. And yeah, a lot of people would come out to see it, and just because no one really makes movies in Lombok, even just a small little project like this, they all get really excited about. And so they'd all come out and watch the film, and like me and the guy who went with me to show it. Because we're not from Indonesia, we can more safely speak about God, so we could show the films and preach a little bit. And then we'd put Alex in contact with a bunch of people. So like I said, the main actor is now a Christian. So everyone in the film, they're not actually actors, they're just from Sembalun, that town in Lombok, who were willing to act for free. And so all the actors were locals, and Alex got a bunch of new contacts, and now he has more relationship again in the village, so he can start going back there. And yeah, so we'd use film projects like this to connect people and share who God is. Yeah. Most of them were. The one in particular, the father, so the guy who wears the hat, he's actually one of the like Muslim leaders in that town. He's gone to Mecca, so we did like a pilgrimage where he went to the Middle East and went to Mecca. And I guess in Islam, once you do that, you're like a higher level kind of. So he actually like worked at a mosque and was like a Muslim leader. And so he didn't know we were Christians, otherwise he probably wouldn't have done it. But basically, yeah, even a Muslim leader was helping Christian missions, basically. And so yeah, he's in contact with Alex now too. And I think he knows that Alex is a Christian, but like, kind of because Alex does a lot of community work and helps out in their village, they're starting to accept him more. And this was part of that too. Like, he's the one who brings foreigners who help. And so the Muslims are starting to accept him more because he helps them a lot. But yeah, so a lot of the actors were Muslim. The two main actors, I think, are both Christians now. The guy who acted his brother, the one with the goatee up there, he was a tour guide. But when we went, there was just an earthquake, so a lot of tourists weren't coming. So he's a tour guide, he knows the island, he speaks English, but there's no tourists, so he can't work. So he just offered to help translate and stuff for us for free. And he was Muslim. We'd always have to, we'd be filming, and we'd have to stop in the middle of the day because he had to go to the mosque and pray. But now he helps Alex all the time. He's one of Alex's main contacts and is like, he won't call himself a Christian yet, but he's very open to that, and he talks with Alex all the time and just has been learning a lot. So it's a slow process. They don't like become Christians right away, but a lot of them have been a lot more open to it and spending time hearing from Alex and that stuff. Yeah, so it was supposed to be like he was giving him a trip to go to Australia, because earlier on he was talking about that was like his dream was to go to Australia, and so it was a flyer for vacation in Australia. Sort of showing that his dad gave his brother the present, which was the motorcycle, because that's what he wanted, but he also gave the main actor, Putra, what he wanted, which was the trip to Australia. Which that was, yeah, because it ties back into the prodigal son story, which I could preach on, but Pastor Fred can do that. It's this thing. So yeah, and so all of this stuff, like normally, we have virtually no budget to make films. Like most of the support we have goes to getting us there. And so we were there for 5 weeks, and so in that time we had to find people who would act for free, people who would translate for free. All the vehicles and stuff we used, people just let us borrow. All the like film locations, like that farm was just somebody was like, yeah, sure, you can use my farm, do whatever you want. And so it's always really cool on these stories, like making these films, where we go there, we don't know anyone, we don't speak the language, and we have no like resources, and we can just pray and like, I mean, there's one day where like we needed all these props and vehicles, and we just prayed and asked God what we should do, and he would like, different people were praying, would get ideas to like, oh, go here and ask this person. I'm like, we don't know who that is, but we'll go to that part of town and ask if we can use somebody's car, and just, yeah, God provides, and it's really cool to see that. And so that was part of the film school, and we do projects like this. I think there's more slides. After the film school, I joined the ministry called Signet Films, which I said it's, yeah, ministry of YWAM. We use the power of story through film to reach lost people. And so this project was in Indonesia, but the ministry I joined actually focuses on Indigenous Australians, or Aboriginals, a lot of people call them. I think the next slide is a map. Oh, no, this is the team. Okay, this is Signet Films. Very small group of us. Obviously, that's me. I'm holding a microphone because I do a lot of sound for video. Both the other two guys are named Josh. That Josh started the ministry, and then there's another person named Josh. These two, that's the same guy who had his face blurred out, and his wife. Again, they're covering their faces because they can't have their faces be seen. So they're holding up posters for 2 of the films we made, which are right here, these 2 films. These ones are longer. This one is, I think, like an hour and a half. This is like 40 minutes. So Signet Films does longer projects than the film school did. I think there's the next slide that I'll do really quick. So it's going to quickly show where they focus. So we're based in Perth because that's the city, that's where the base is. And this is Western Australia. And then the next slide zooms in on Western Australia. So the state of Western Australia is really big. So there's different regions, is what they call them. And so Perth is down here, this little white section. And then these films were made in the Kimberley, which is this top section up here. And the Kimberley has the highest population of Indigenous Australians. That's why we focus on there. And the film is called Kimberley Spirit because it's in the Kimberley. But the next slide. I'm just going to cover these really quick because we're pretty much out of time. But yeah, the ministry would make longer films. This one is called Wangai Warrior. It was the first film the ministry made. It was finished in 2014, so that was done before I joined the ministry. But they would still use it a lot. It speaks, and the next one is Kimberley Spirit, which Kimberley Spirit is going to be a 4-part series. So they finished the first movie in the series, which is the one here, right before I joined. So I didn't help make this one, but I was helping with the script for the second one. And I was able to go to the Kimberley and show this film as well. I think I have some slides of that. Yeah. So right after I joined the ministry, they bought this giant blow-up screen. As you can see, that guy's a normal height, and the screen is twice his height. So it's a giant blow-up screen. And we went to the community. So this is actually in the Kimberley. It's hard to see because it's at night, and cameras don't work great at night. But so we went to a small town called Luma in the Kimberley, and we set up the big screen, and we're actually showing Kimberley Spirit there. And you can kind of see all their heads, but literally the whole town would come. And I think actually probably the closest movie theater is Perth, which is like multiple days drive or like a 5-hour flight down. So a lot of these kids would never even go to a movie theater. So going to their community and putting up this giant blow up screen, they all loved it. And then yeah, this is just more of that night. We had set up all these lights and made it look nice, and we had a barbecue with free food for the community and to really celebrate the community. But so with Signet Films, a big way they use their films is the Kimberley actually has the highest domestic abuse rate in the world. So there's tons of domestic violence, domestic abuse. And so if we're outsiders, we just go in and we start preaching about that or really anything, they don't really listen to us. But then if we make a film that addresses the topic, we can stay and talk about the film afterwards, and it just gives us a way where we can like speak into that part of their lives with it being culturally acceptable. And there's lots of other issues the movies address as well. But the films are like addressed specifically to the Kimberley and the issues they face. And it has like Aboriginal actors and tells their stories, which is really rare. I think the only other movie I know of is called Australia,